Nicodemus had heard enough about what Jesus was up to in Jerusalem to make him think he ought to pay him a visit, find out more. On the other hand, he was a VIP with a big theological reputation to uphold, so he decided this visit needed to happen at night. Better to be safe than sorry, he thought, and he waited until his neighbors were all asleep. So Nicodemus was fairly safe, and at least at the start of their nocturnal interview, Jesus was fairly patient. What the whole thing boiled down to, Jesus told him, was that unless you got born again, you might as well give up. Well, that's all well and good, Nicodemus said, but just how were you supposed to pull off a thing like this? How especially are you supposed to pull it off when you're pushing 65? How do you get born again when it's a challenge to just get out of bed in the morning? He even got a little sarcastic. Could a man enter his mother's womb a second time when he could barely get in a taxi without the driver coming back and shoving him from behind? A gust of wind happened to whistle down the chimney at that point, making the dying embers burst into flame. And Jesus said, being born again was like that. It wasn't something you did. The wind did it. The Spirit did it. It was something that happened for God's sake. How can this be? Nicodemus said. And that's when Jesus let him have it. Thanks to Frederick Buechner's deep theological insight and great sense of humor, we can really imagine this midnight rendezvous. Oh, Nicodemus, we might say, but when pressed, could we anticipate or even explain what Jesus meant? Kids say, oh yeah, I know that, and then when they're asked to explain, they're like, no, I don't understand. What is all this deep theological, mystic verbiage of Jesus? What is the message that we encounter? There's certainly a great deal within his words to dwell upon, unpacking the nuances and context. One of the most famous sayings comes from this encounter: for God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, so that whoever believes in him would have eternal life. We read it on signs at baseball games, on billboards as we cross the highways throughout the nation. And still, we might be just as puzzled as Nicodemus. While the text reveals deep truth about the nature of God, of Jesus' mission and humanity's interconnectedness with the Holy Trinity, I wonder about the peripheral and yet the ever-encompassing realities of the conversation. It's dark. It's nighttime. There are two men, so similar and yet completely opposite. There's the image of rebirth, the idea of trust, and something remarkable lies within the message of the unspoken. It begs several questions. When do we come in the dark, in the cover of night, and why? Is the darkness a friend, or a foe, or a co-conspirator, or a tool we haven't quite figured out how to utilize? What is trust? What is belief? And what is our role in partnership with the Holy Trinity? If you're willing, go with me into and beyond the dark to discover what Jesus can illuminate with this simple and yet ever so important experience of trusting like a new baby. Will you pray with me? God, in the ways that we are but children, but babies, give us insight and help us depend on you. In the ways that we are childlike enough to come toward you, God, honor that. Allow the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts and even the daydreamings to be filled with your Spirit, that we might believe, that we might trust, that we might see like you do. In your Son's name we pray. Amen. Amen. When and why do we come in the dark, in the cover of the night? on your flashlights for a moment. What resonates within that question? When, why do you come in the dark? Do we stay in the dark? Do we have special dark places to go? No doubt we have found refuge and protection in dark places. Under the covers is a great place to go. It's safe and seemingly proactive in the response to our fears. All the bad stuff will go away while we're in bed, right? The covers, our dark spaces, give us protections in ways that we can sometimes be afraid to get rid of them. Nicodemus' curiosity was so strong that it moved him beyond the safety of his home walls, but he still needed darkness to protect his reputation in front of his fellow scholars and priests. Our roles, our status, the systems that help or uphold our ways of life can act as a protectant, but they can be found in the dark. I know I could recycle more, no doubt, but the dark of the trash can makes my waste, and perhaps even my wasteful ways, seemingly disappear. There's a dark space of not seeing that can also protect and insulate us. This dark space can be our ignorance, covering our ears, even allowing the mystery of God's message to remain unknowable instead of wrestling with it, wrestling with something that might change us. Now, lest you see me saying this with a wagging finger, I am simply offering these reflections as a part of our Lenten practice to examine our habits, our biases, our unrecognized assumptions in the light of the road that Jesus walks in life, death, and new life. Sometimes the darkness is a necessary protection. But when does it create a wall between ourselves and the light of Christ? The dark space of fear is also a world in which we can run, in which we might fall, which we might seek, despite the fact that here, darkness turns against us in a paralyzing way. The combination of the fears of what we might have to face and the protection that doesn't actually protect can scare us beyond knowing. We become scared to be authentic and part of a whole. We become scared that we might be in need of receiving. And here's the real Ash Wednesday, humble moment of soul searching. In our culture, receiving can be the hardest thing we can do. We see ourselves as lowly, as humble. We become childlike and brought to the base of everything. And yet, it is also at this base where things start to matter. It's at this vantage point that we look up and see in the mirror of God our belovedness, rather than what we've striven for as an image to prop up. Brene Brown tells a poignant story in her book, Daring Greatly, about giving food to a homeless man one day. She noted, however, that she couldn't look him in the eye. This observation made her jump to an impulse solution. I'll just give more. I'll give more money. I'll give more to the services that help people like him, and I'll give my time. That will help. I'll be able to look them in the eye. But the nagging within didn't go away because her eyes still didn't meet the other. Finally, after months of conversation with her pastor, her therapist, and her inner self, she realized that she was afraid to look because she might see herself. Raised in a family and a culture that diminished those who needed something, who might be considered high maintenance, who might receive with no strings attached, she couldn't imagine the vulnerability it would require to open her hands to simply receive. When Mac and I got married, the entire church that we were a part of in Spokane had become a third family to us and ever generous. I was so blown away by the freedom by which people gave their time, their money, their resources and skills details to make our day special. And all I could do was just get out of the way and say thank you. But it was hard. Receiving love unbounded can be difficult. This one fear, calling forth our humility and humanity, breaks open the darkness. In fact, Jesus' message to Nicodemus lies at the heart of this. Whatever protects you, whatever you miss seeing, whatever fear paralyzes you, will be overcome with a great, more infiltrating, ever gracious and unmerited love. How will you experience it? By coming out of the dark, out of the protection of a dark womb and closed eyes, and into a world of freedom where you simply receive first. So how do we do this? As a Wesleyan at heart, this is a daily experience. It's a daily waking up. It's a daily rebirthing. Some of our Christian siblings hold fast to the one and done experience where all you need is to say yes one time. You've got the trust, you've got following, you're being shaped by God in transformation, and that's that. Now, in theory, I get that, and I say yes. It only takes me to say yes to God and God with me, right? But for me, in practice, I need practice. And if the practice of following, trust, being shaped doesn't always start first with a yes, I'm coming out of the dark again. I choose life again. I will certainly fall into traps. I'll trick myself into thinking that following Jesus while in the darkness of fear or self-preservation is okay and not an oxymoron. I'll justify ways of doing life that if brought into the light would make my grandma blush. For example, judging or comparing myself to other mothers or wives or women or professionals based on popularity, glamour, power, competence, ability to juggle, that's a big one, and sweetness. All of these things are things that are so incongruent to the way that I'm meant to live and the way I'm meant to be. And yet I might trick myself and say, that's the way of God. I need to practice instead. How do we do this? The famous line from this story gets pulled as the one answer: believe. Believe and you will turn from darkness with the ease of turning from Brussels sprouts. Believe and truth will unfurl before you like a banner. Believe and all those problems, those conflicts, the opposing ideas will marvelously align into a yellow brick road toward paradise. What is belief? What do we believe? Let me return to Frederick Buechner in his thoughts about Nicodemus. I'm telling you like it is, Jesus said. I'm telling you what I've seen. I'm telling you there are people on Medicare walking around with love light in their eyes. I'm telling you there are ex-cons teaching Sunday school. I'm telling you there are undertakers scared silly will put them out of business. Jesus said, I'm telling you, God's got such a thing for this loused up planet that he sent me down so that if you don't believe your own eyes, believe mine. Or maybe you'll believe me. Maybe you won't come sneaking around half scared to death in the dark anymore, but instead come clean. Come to life. Belief is seen as God sees. Richard Rohr says, art is a giveaway to what people believe in. These things illustrate what people are drawn to. So I chose some of what Google says are the most famous paintings or pieces of art. And Cami, if you could just, we've got The Last Supper, Mona Lisa, pictures of outside, the beauty of the world, and that's captured with charcoal. The creation of Adam, from this? Yes. Could Nicodemus? Could he see it in the dark? Could he consider this shift in his understanding? Could he hold this mystery? Could he see with God's eyes, seeing what mattered right before him? In the midst of all these questions, we must rely on the promise of God shared by Jesus. The Holy Trinity, by God, through Jesus, and with the Spirit, does the work. The Holy reveals all things. Jesus came to be our new set of glasses, our new eyes to see, our new ability to see the dark and see the light, the new appreciation of what the dark entails, a new trust to claim that what we can have, protection, security, wisdom, courage, freedom, beyond the dark, comes from God, always and ever. I'm telling you, like it is, God's got such a thing for this loused up planet, that he has sent me down so that if you don't believe your own eyes, maybe you'll believe mine. Maybe